right, thank you so much. We're continuing on with Coffee with Stan. What an amazing conversation we just had with Congressman Andy Kim. Such an amazing guy. It is going to be so easy to say Senator Kim. I'm ready. I've already, you know how to say it. We're about to have an amazing conversation with Congresswoman Angie Craig. Then followed by Representative Susan Wild, and then we're going to end our day together at 2:30 with David Hogg from Leaders We Deserve, March for Our Lives. So we have some great conversations ahead, but right now I want to focus on the fabulous Angie Craig, Congresswoman from Minnesota's 2nd District, served since 2019. You know, the Congresswoman has an amazing history and story. Growing up in a mobile home park, raised by a single mom and her grandmother, kind of like me. She moved to Minnesota after college and has been there ever since. And she and her wife have 4 adult sons. I think she started out her career as a journalist, right? Then a businesswoman, and now the first Congresswoman to represent Minnesota's 2nd District as a out parent. So we are thrilled to be with you today. You also have 3 grandsons too. This isn't possible as you come up on the screen. How can you have 3 grandsons? But congratulations on that. It's great to see you. How are you?
Stan, thank you so much for having me on to all of your viewers. And I tell you, the grandsons are keeping me young. I'm having such a blast. My wife and I are very blessed and grateful, and they keep me sane. So
What are the
I'm glad you're
years?
here. We
What are
need
the
it.
years? How old are they?
Our oldest is Noah. He's 3 years old.
Okay.
Then we have Wyatt. He's 1. And then we have Noah's little brother Levi, who is about 2.5 months old. So
Okay.
uh, it's so much fun, and they really remind you all over again why you even want to be in Congress in such a divided Congress and divided time, and work with, frankly, a few lunatics on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of lunatics, your Thanksgiving should be full with those 3 little ones on top of the rest of the family. So that'll be really fun around the Thanksgiving table. I'm sure you're looking forward to that. I want to
We
jump
are.
in because as I researched you and have spoken with you before, I really am so impressed with how specific the work and advocacy is that you do. And I wanted to start out with the way that you've approached investing in rural America and to represent your district. You know, the idea that you're getting into writing the bill to allow year-round sales of E15 fuel and getting it passed through the House for the first time. You know, for all of us who are not as familiar with that, can you dive into what was needed to be done, why it was your voice that got it passed, and how this affects the people in your district?
Well, Stan, thank you. This is an area that I think not enough Democrats are focused on, and that's making sure that you spend time in rural communities where you have the honor and privilege to represent them. I grew up the granddaughter of a cotton and bean farmer, and so I know what that looks like in a family. But unfortunately, his farm got caught up in the 1980s farm crisis. So when I ran for Congress in this district that had been it still has been in Republican hands for 68 of 82 years, I looked around it and I said, my gosh, this district is 40% covered in corn and soybeans. I've got to spend a lot of time with those folks. So as I've done that, I've come to appreciate that E15, which is, it's derived from corn, and it's essentially 15% ethanol that you would have at your gas pump. It's actually unleaded 88 if you're pulling into the gas pump, and it can be used in almost every car that's been produced since somewhere in the early 1990s. It's actually about 40 cents cheaper per gallon than regular gasoline. And it's a renewable fuel element. So it was a no-brainer to me that I would champion this issue. And as you said, it was a Democrat who, for the first time in America's history, got year-round sales of E15 across the finish line in the U.S. House of Representatives. And this is indicative of kind of the work that I do. I dive into each of my communities. I understand their concerns, and then I really do try on a policy basis to work to help them and to help them grow from an economic perspective. And oh, by the way, I'm going to say this now, sustainable aviation fuel, which is going to be made of renewable fuels as well, is going to help us decarbonize the aviation sector. It's a huge new opportunity. You see a lot of investment in it, and it will help us keep our family farmers busy and also help us to address climate change.
When you talk about, just to stay in this for a moment deeper, on this E15 fuel, what was the pushback? What was on the other side, or was it just no one had taken a common sense approach to it, so it just wasn't brought forward? Did you have to
You know,
go
it's
up
one,
against anything in terms of a perception?
yeah, I think it's interesting because data from 40 years ago was not as positive as the new data, as these ethanol producers have been able to change the way that they blend these fuels. It's much more environmentally friendly. But I will say to you, this isn't exactly a Republican Democratic issue. It's more of the oil refineries would rather just, have crude oil rather than blend renewable liquid fuels in that oil. So it ends up being a little bit of a battle. Texas Democrats voted against the bill, for example, because they're home to all of the oil down in Texas. So it's one of those areas where you got to understand where your allies are. Of course, I worked very closely with a guy named Dusty Johnson in South Dakota, who's a Republican. And of course, we have aligned priorities because it matters to our shared constituency in these rural communities. The other area is just on broadband. This has been an area where Democrats have really moved the investment into rural broadband in the last several years with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And this is an area that I've been so pleased to be able to bring home to counties like LeSueur County in my congressional district. And, you're not going to win these rural communities in your reelection as a Democrat. But you know what? You do better than most Democrats if you show up and you listen and you let them know that you care about them. And that's what we've always tried to do since I've represented this district.
It's interesting. I think now the third person that we're talking to on this series who has brought up Dusty Johnson, and so he must be acting across the aisle more than most people talk about. So I think good on him for at least putting his people first, at least on some topics like the topic that you described. I think it's hard to have any conversation today without talking about lowering costs for working families. And I know this is a big part of your platform, a big part of your work, leading the effort to pass the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, a bipartisan package of bills lowering costs. Can you talk to us about what some of the pieces of that are and how you came about being one of the backers of that?
Well, at the end of the day, year-round E15 found its moment in time because it's costs less money at the gas pump. And, as I travel this congressional district even today, it's not unusual for it to be 30 to 40 cents cheaper a gallon. And so even when you have a good policy, sometimes you have to wait for the right moment. And in terms of lowering fuel costs, the day that I heard Nancy Pelosi say the word ethanol 3 times in the same day, I knew we were onto something and that the bill was gaining momentum. Lowering cost is a big issue, as my constituents have faced inflation. I've said through this whole election season, this is no time to take a victory lap. Yes, interest rates are coming down. The economy is showing some good overall signals, but as long as folks come to the grocery store twice a week and have to pay 7, 8 bucks a pound for a pound of hamburger meat, people are not going to be happy about what's happening from an average household spending perspective. So these are the kinds of things that I've tried to identify, from lowering cost. There is something to this point of corporations have had record high profits. At the same time, the prices have continued to remain high, and I'd like to see a lot more transparency. But as co-chair of the Supply Chain Caucus, just making sure that we got our supply chains back up and running was a huge priority for me. And cost is still an issue, and that's why I've also focused on prescription drug costs here in across the country. And people talk a lot. It's funny to me to see all my colleagues running on this $35 cap on insulin bill this election cycle. That was actually my bill. I wrote it, authored it in the House of Representatives. So we've been really active on lowering costs for a very long time out of our office.
What was the driver for you on that insulin bill in particular? How did that get to your attention in a personal way?
Well, I spent 22 years in the private sector working in healthcare before I came to Congress. In the last 4 years, I had responsibility for running the self-insured health plan at our Fortune 500 company. And to see the cost of some of these drugs, including the cost of insulin, be so exorbitant for no good reason, when I knew full well that the margins were just astronomical, and the cost to actually produce this drug was pennies on the dollar. That really opened my eyes when I had to run the health plan to just the cost of specialty drugs, the cost of compound drugs, and that we have to do something about the cost of drugs in our country.
I'd love to jump, if it's all right with you, over to the environment. Again, you continue to introduce and co-sponsor bills, and one of those gives local communities the funding they need in order to address runoff pollution, which is enhanced by rapidly melting snow and rain. So how have you identified this issue, and how are you dealing with it through some of this legislation?
Well, this is a really important point because, if you think about it, Minnesota is the land of lakes. And I've got the Mississippi River and the Minnesota River right here in my congressional district. We border Wisconsin a little bit. And 40% of my land is covered in corn and soybeans, which means if you're going to address these water runoff issues into our lakes and our streams and our rivers, you're going to have to partner with your local farmers in order to make sure that we're making that happen. That caught my attention in my first term in Congress. I've been on the Agriculture Committee for all three of the terms that I've served here in Congress. And in my first term, I introduced something called the Local Water Protection Act. President Trump was president at the time. And I worked with Republicans to get that bill shepherded through because it was good for the environment, but it was also really good for our family farmers. And basically, what that is it reauthorized a grant program called Section 319 that is overseen by the EPA that allows farmers to come up with innovative ways to prevent fertilizer and other runoff into our streams and our waterways, our lakes, etc. So it's that practical, just thinking through, here's what's cause and effect. And what I found is that, the family farmers in my congressional district, there's no one who cares more about the soil, about dirt, about the land than these individuals. And so if you listen to them, listen to what they need, you can achieve the goal of helping them be even better stewards of our environment. And that's exactly what that bill did. And I was proud to have that bill signed into law by President Trump.
Congratulations on that. Again, it just feels like another example of you going, past the front line, behind the line, and into the information, and bringing some intelligence to it so that it can be solved. So thank you for that. I wanted to jump. We've talked about energy and the economy a bit, but I did have another question there, which connects the climate change with local economies. The energy sector as a whole has regained 71% of the jobs lost due to the pandemic in 2020. How does that affect your district? Have you seen that same rebound, or are there some differences there that you want to talk to us about?
Well, look, all I will say is that, there is a huge potential for job growth and for economic development through the energy sector. It's important, I think, that we think strategically about a well-rounded, all of the above energy strategy, including the types of biofuels, liquid fuels that I talked about previously. And we've got to utilize those resources responsibly. I was very proud, and we get our opponents running against us on it all the time. But the Inflation Reduction Act was the largest investment in renewable energy ever in America's history. And I just think that specifically in providing billions of federal funding for public infrastructure, the semiconductor and the energy investments right here in Minnesota is just a huge, huge investment that it's going to take a long time. We're going to see those investments coming to fruition for a very long time into the future. When you make these level of investments, you don't get just a 2-year return in the next election cycle. And I think that is what I'm most proud of with the Inflation Reduction Act is for a change. We passed a bill that is really strategic in its long-term impact, both in economic growth and development and job creation, and just making sure that great projects in Minnesota, like the Heartland Hub, which is providing the ag sector with some decarbonization efforts, are on the right track. And we still need to solve some issues like transmission issues with some of the investments that we've made, and permitting issues with some of the investments that we've made. But Stan, I think many of these investments are on the right track.
Well, and to pull out another co-sponsored piece of legislation, the Bipartisan Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which I know you started to talk about a little bit earlier, which will reduce our nation's carbon emissions and bring technological innovation and millions of new jobs. Again, another massive piece of legislation. Can you tell us a few more details about that?
Well, and it's really the only bipartisan bill that you see in the U.S. Congress. There's a conservative arm of the folks here in Minnesota that support the carbon fee and dividend proposal. Basically, it would put a fee on those who are the polluters out there and pay a dividend to households to make sure that your energy costs don't go up as we're transitioning to this new less carbon emitting future of ours. And like I said, it's an interesting concept. And there is a group in Minnesota called Citizens Climate Lobby, and they have sort of call it a Democratic arm and a conservative arm. And it's the one idea that it seems like both parties, at least some people in both parties who will consent that climate change exists, is something that we can agree on. And why? I mean, we know why it's important as Democrats. The way that I talk about it, though, across my congressional district, because it's the most evenly divided congressional district in America, is I talk a lot about the impacts of extreme weather. Of course, we're seeing this on the East Coast in Florida and North Carolina with the massive hurricanes. But, a few months ago, Minnesota, in my district specifically, many towns in my district, were completely flooded, and now we're in a drought condition. So we're seeing these floods and droughts and just the inability to predict, and that's going to affect, our growing season here in Minnesota as we move forward. So if we don't make the investments now, the extreme climate events that we're seeing are only going to worsen.
Well, you talk about your district being, one of the most, if not the most evenly divided. And I think it's your pragmatic approach to problem solving that has you now representing your district for 3 terms, on to hopefully your 4th term. I'm sure your 4th term, knocking on wood. And I think that both the people in Minnesota and in our country are lucky to have you, lucky to have such intelligence brought to government, and the pieces of legislation that you're working on are the kinds of legislative pieces which truly touch the people that it's meant to. It's government reaching out and saying, I see you, and we're here to help you, because that's what we are. We're here because we are of you, for you and by you. And you are one of the best, I think, examples of that in the United States Congress. I am very, very happy to put a hand in the air and say, please support Congresswoman Angie Craig. There's a link there. You can just link right through, give as much as is good for you. If you can't give money, give time, give energy. There's opportunities to volunteer on Congresswoman Craig's website. And of course, you can share our conversation digitally. And that way your friends can listen to what is this kind of a conversation, which leaves me with a sense of hope, leaves me with a sense of, it was really loud a few hours ago listening to television. I am so glad to have this kind of heart-to-heart with you. I'm sorry I will not be part of your Thanksgiving dinner, but I'll be thinking of you on Thanksgiving Day with the 3 grandsons hooping it up. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
Well, I'll be chasing a 3-year-old, I'm sure. So
All
thank you,
right.
Stan, for having me, and I'm grateful for this series.
Well, we're really happy to have you on today, and we will rejoin after a little bit of a break with Representative Susan Wild. So looking forward to that conversation. And Congresswoman, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.